Good morning. It's not afternoon yet. We got one more minute. But anyway, welcome to History at High Noon. I have been trying to get this person to speak for over 2 years. So I am excited today. He talks to me before while we're setting up and all, but no, I finally got him. But welcome here to everybody. Please feel free to eat all you'd like and drinks. On August the 24th will be our next one, and that's when I'll talk about the stories nobody wants me to tell. So come back in August and hit the dirt about all your neighbors and your families. New museum exhibit opens on September 23rd. It's Root Doctors to Technology. Now, I've had the most fun with this because of the root doctors we had in Coffee County. And when I read this, and I realize this is the same thing my great-grandmother used to tell me to do for a headache or whatever. So obviously it worked because a lot of them survived. If you know anybody that would like to give 3 hours a month to open the museum, most of the time you can sit and read a book, unless there's a group from the park or feel something like that. 3 hours a month, and if you'll call me or see me sometime, I'll talk about when I have available and whatever. Okay? You can do a morning or an afternoon. On Thursday and Fridays, it's just 10 to 1. So we'll work it out. Y'all let us know what you'd like to do. If you have any topics, I do have a topic that I'm considering for September. As soon as the person I contacted gets back with me, I hope it goes through. But if you got any topics or ideas, I had one today, and I hope to convince her to come and speak to us. But please, if you have any ideas of a good topic, now please remember we want a good speaker too. We don't want somebody that almost like this, so you can't hear. In that, where I'm through, so I will introduce our speaker today. Everybody knows him. I knew his daddy. He was a top-notch math teacher. And Johnny is just a wonderful person, and we have the best conversations. And see, when you can talk about anything with somebody, you know your friends. Mr. Johnny Wilkerson.
Thanks, Carol. I was listening, and she said that, I guess no pressure, huh? But yeah, Carol and I, we talk about a lot of things when I'm setting up, and like she said, we can, when you have on the other side, when you got a person you can talk to anything about history, and it's true, and nobody's offended by it, you can, that's a good friend, and that's a person that's interested in knowing the truth. But again, I want to thank Carol again and everybody for coming to hear our story. I kind of dubbed my story, How Did the Wilkersons Get to Coffee County? And, but I want to also thank my nephew, Leviticus Moore III, and his wife, Amber, because they're the ones that's got the Ancestry account, and they helped me a lot with putting this together. Sometimes you have oral history and you got real documented history, but oral history is good in a way, and I'm gonna sit here and tell you right now, for years we've been listening to a lot of oral history. Now, what we found out with this now, that some of the things that was told to us, maybe just, you can hear, Jim and I can tell, we can hear the same story. If we're living 20 years, we may tell it different, So that's one good thing about documentary, and that's what, and I'm a person, I like to go with the truth. So here we go. Again, I hope some of my family members, we don't create a big argument when I finish with this thing, because I know some of them are going to be watching. Okay, we start here with Levi Wilkerson. Now, there's some questions about Levi that we found in Ancestry on their report. It was listed as Levi Mulatto and Susan Wilkerson. So just by judging by that, we have to kind of believe if he was mulatto, and her name was Susan Wilkerson, which he was born in 1830, and she was born in 1838, and they was born in South Carolina. We don't know if her parents, we know both of their parents was from Virginia. And that's something we got to do further research on, because these two was born in South Carolina. So, but and you got to look at the time, 1830, about 1840, 1850, he was a young man. So he had what we call pass for white. But now the question is whether the Wilkerson name was was her name, and he took on her name, or that's just something we don't know. And then we got a report, and I must mention Miss Cheryl Bussey sent me some information. She's doing the same thing we're doing on the Bussey side of the Wilkerson family. And her information is coming from FamilySearch.org. She came up with Susan's report, and they had Susan Wilkerson, but this time they had Levi Wilkerson. So again, but one fact both reports said, we do know that they was Wilkersons and they was married. And we do know they lived in Herb County, that's Franklin, Georgia. And the children that was born from and then let me say this, we found out also Levi was a landowner. He owned about 200 acres up there. Now, questions about that is, if he lived as mulatto and if he was passing, that's what they call passing. Did he fight in the militia? Because 200 acres is what they was giving militia fighters for wiping out the Indians, the government, the state governments. We had the Georgia militia here in Georgia. So these are questions we don't know how he obtained 200 acres, but from that marriage, there was Martha, born in 1866, Leonidas, born in 1866. We don't know if they was twins. Mary, 1868. George, 1870. Now, put a peg in that because George is my great-grandfather. Then her brother Dan was born in 1870. Amanda was born in 1874, and Sally, 1876, and Larson in 1878. There was 8 kids from this union. And the next search, we found out that apparently Levi had moved his family to a small town in Georgia, a little south of Herb County, Tableton, Georgia. So, and we found out that he had moved his family there. And apparently that's where George and his siblings basically grew up and became young adults. Now, in searching this, starting with George had 5 children from what we call, it was listed as from another relationship. Now, we don't know the parents of these 5. We don't know if they're from the same woman or from separate women. I know my father always told me, my grandfather, Robert, and we'll get down to him, he didn't know who his biological mother was. He was raised by another woman. But those names was George Ann, Mamie, Ada, and Robert. Put a peg in that, so that's my grandfather, and Minnie. So he had children before he married in this lady, Mary Ann Walton. He got married in December 28th, 1899 in Tableton, Georgia, Talbot County. And they had children. One was Martha, and then Leola, and then Willie, and then Emma, and then Susan, Hannah, and Hugh, and and Rosabelle and G.O.T. Now, we just think that name, I think that we discovered that name was George Thomas, but they call him G.O.T. And then we had Herbert, and then there was a Ruby. So, that's the family he raised in Tableton. But then Mary Ann died. We don't know what she died of. Mary Ann Walters died. So George had children in his household from that marriage, and we don't know how he moved, how he got down here to Georgia. That's one thing about this. We kind of go by census and what these reports sent us, but we know he eventually moved to Crawford County. What his incentive was to move to Crawford County, we don't know. I do know Peter Vickers. His story was he was one of the richest black men, and not only just in Crawford County, but in Georgia. And I don't want to tell his story, but in his living at one point in his life, he wanted to give back to the black community. He was well known here in Crawford County, and he had chopped maybe gave up about maybe 20 acres of his land to what he was going to do is invited a lot of black farm hands to come in and learn a little more about agriculture. That was going to be his way of so they can go out and maybe tend their own farm and just learn a lot more about it. Now, I don't know if George was one of those that migrated to Crawford County, because the reason why I say that, because later on I'll tell you that his son Robert, when I was a little boy, he used to take us out to Sunnyside, and I think Peter Davis is buried at the Sunnyside now. Those are the Vickerses out there. But my papa used to take us, Robert, used to take us out to Sunnyside and just visit, and that was often. So we don't know if there was some kind of connection there. But anyway, he ended up in Douglas, Georgia, Crawford County. And a little bit about the children that he had. We know before he moved to Douglas, George, we do know Georgia seemed to have been his first child by her birth date. And I guess when she became a young lady, she kind of moved out on her own, and she was one of those that passed for white. If you notice this is a class picture of her with all her classmates, and you can't really tell what she were. And we do know shortly after that, maybe after high school, she did marry a man named John Carter. They started a church. They were founders of a church up there called Power Baptist Church. So we do know, and she's buried up there in that cemetery, and probably a lot of other families buried in that cemetery. Now we do know, like say, Robert came to Douglas with George, and Ada came with. Because she married a Jack Bussey, and that's how the Busseys are related to us, to the Wilkersons. She was a Wilkerson, and then she married a Jack Bussey. She was right here in Crawford County. She married a William Watts, and that's the Watts family, Buddy Watts, and that's the descendants of, and everybody know Van Henderson, the Hendersons, Georgia's husband, Georgia Henderson. That's how there came, because many came down with George. In the meantime, we had a young lady named Daisy Fairley. She was married to Albert Fairley, and they had a household of Leola Fairley, Roxy Fairley, and at the time now Leola was 16, and then you had Victoria Fairley, James Fairley, and you had John Fairley. He was 2 years old at the time, and Dewey. And then they had another brother, Green. I heard my father mention those names. Well, in time, Albert died, so now Daisy was left with, like to me, about 7 children to raise. And I'm going to tell you a little story about Daisy. we did both reports. We found out that Daisy was actually a card-carrying Choctaw Indian. Now that's an older picture of her. She, when I saw a younger picture, she had jet black hair, but she had very dark skin. And the history is, she was Choctaw Indian. If you know anything about Choctaw, in the South here, Cherokee is popular. Everybody says they have Cherokee somewhere because it was popular in the East here. But Choctaw, what I'm proud of is Choctaw is the people that came from the North. If you read, I read from several sources, they're the people that came from the North. And who was the people from the North? Around the Eskimo area. If you notice, the look is there. They came all the way south, settled in Mississippi, and then, like all groups, as groups grow, they separate, and the Cherokee is a spinoff of the Choctaw. That's just a little history about what I'm proud of, knowing that she's a card-carrying Choctaw. But it's obvious, African Americans in there, but that's the way it was back then. Apparently, George and Daisy met, and Robert came along, traveled down with George. He was here. Now the story about that is, I think there was a father and a son dating a mother and a daughter. George was dating Daisy. Robert was dating that 16-year-old daughter, Leola. Now, and they became a blended family. Now, they also had children. They had children of Emmeline, Charlie, Homer, Rosa B., Nathan, and Herbert, and Everett. So when they got married, Daisy's children came and they mixed. They became a blended family. That's what we call it now. Now at that time, Robert was 22 years old in the household when the 1920 census was done of the household there. And we know that Leola, my grandmother, got married to Robert at 14. So we want to think that maybe they was married before he went to the military. Robert did go to the military. He served in World War I. And but when he came back, I guess at the right time, he was listed in the household, but he was 22 years old. They was married, and in November the 4th, 1919, this is my grandfather and my grandmother. They began right away having children. They had my father first, Johnny Wilkerson. He tells a story that, apparently when they had him, because he was born in Broxton, Georgia, but he remember they had moved to Jacksonville, Florida, and he remember as a baby, as a toddler, riding around in a stroller, going to the theater. That's what he tell me. That when he was pretty much a toddler. And okay, so and while in Jacksonville, Mabel was born there, and also Charles Sr. was born there. Now I'm gonna put a plug in here. There was another child born there between Mabel and Charles. His name was Frazier, but Frazier didn't live long. I think he lived to be about 2 years old. And the story was, he went outside and he swallowed a piece of glass, and of course he died. But he would have been right there between Mabel and Charles. And my daddy told the story of coming back to a cousin of his went to pick him up, and went to pick him up, and they brought him back to Coffee County, and he remembered coming back at 6 years old. He said that was the first time he seen a hog when coming back to Coffee County. And of course they went, at the time, Papa, they went working, he went sharecropping with the Adams family, Lynn Adams farm. They talked about that a lot. So that's when they was children. They grew up on that farm. And then I guess from there, there's Ruby was born next, and then Lillian, and then there was a set of twins, James and George. That was the children from that union, from Leola and Robert. Now, just a little side story about that. When, again, like I said, they grew up on the farm, and when Papa got sick, Daddy was a young man. He had to quit school. I think it was in the 4th grade. He had to quit school and go to work. He did little odd jobs around Crawford County to help feed the family. He worked at everybody might know the mill quarters. They had a sawmill over there. It wasn't much to do for black men and boys around Crawford County except for sharecropping and helping on the farm. But they also tell the story, he was a great shot. He could, Papa would send him out with a gun, and he'll give him 2 bullets. And so that means they was expecting him with those 2 bullets to come back with something to eat. And Grandmama would tell them a story that they would hear a shot out there in the woods, and Papa would tell her, go ahead and start boiling water. We know JR got something. And sure enough, he'd come back with either 1 or 2 some game for supper that night. He was a good shot. That's some of the things that they used to tell about my father. And then now, as he got older and still just working around little odd jobs, he decided he'd go in the military. That was when World War II was on us, and he went to serve in the military. He served there 4 years, and somewhere down that time, Charles joined the Air Force, and but my father came back from the military after serving 4 years and saw there was nothing much going on in Crawford County. Things had not changed much. He had the choice of going to work on somebody's farm. Like I said, there wasn't much choice for black men on that time. So he decided to turn around and go right back in the military. He signed up again. He got credit for serving 4 more years, but he actually served physically 3 years because by that time the war had ended, and they dismissed him. And it just so happened, see, Charles and Johnny, my father, was 6 years apart, and they ended up getting out of the military about the same time. Well, during that time, the military had the GI Bill that came upon us and was passed, and so they had money that they had to try to spend. They both decided they'll go into masonry school, learn masonry and learn about bricks and all, and so, you know, that's what they did, and Dad used to brag about. They built the first steps to the the Carver High Gymnasium when it was built. It's no longer there now. They got a new gym there, but he used to tell us that one of the milestones. Used to talk about that. But then both decided they want to go back to high school. And by that time, during that time, they didn't have 12th grade, they had 11th grade. So he went from 4th grade to signing up to go to high school. I don't know how far Charles had gone to school, but they both grown men, 27, 30-something years old, decided to go back to high school and get their education, get a high school education. So he just told me that was kind of weird. You know, they grown men sitting in class with 16, maybe 15, 16-year-olds, and you know, they was laughed at in a way, but they completed it. And so after that, by that time, Charles had gotten married, had 2 kids here in Douglas, Georgia, and they decided they wanted to Charles and go to Savannah, and my father wanted to go get a little higher education, and he wasn't encouraged too much by a lot of local teachers, that he just didn't have the foundation, because he wanted to go major in math, and they knew it was going to be tough for him. So, but he did enter Fort Valley State College, and he had heard about his brother was having problems in Savannah. He had moved to Savannah, and he had a problem with getting his check, check from the military. You know, you can imagine having 2 children trying to go to school and and depended on the GI Bill, the check to come in. So my father, that the first night at Fort Valley, he decided, show you how much he loved his brother. He decided to go to the office, and something just told him to change his papers. He wanted to go to Savannah State to be there with his brother, because his check was coming. So he knew if he go there with his brother and his family have something to live on until they straighten out Charles's check. So that's what my father did. He went, and he moved in, and he tell my Charles was very surprised to see him coming. I think he asked the question, "What are you doing here?" He said, "I come to help you." And and by the way, Charles had married a local girl, Mac Letha. I think Mac Letha Williams is what her maiden name was. So they decided to give it a go in Savannah, and my father came in and moved in, and he was just telling me it was pretty rough. It was a rough time. I think their third child, Carlitha, was a baby, he told me. And sometimes babies, they need milk, and sometimes the money was low, and he was telling me he would go out and just pawn a suit or find some way to get money for the baby, and they'll have something for that night. It was rough, but they made it through it. And of course, shortly after that, Charles's check began to come. So my father moved out, and he went on and finished Savannah State. I think Charles, during that time also, he had a calling on his life to call into the ministry. And he's one of those that went cold turkey and dropped everything and went into the ministry. So, but he only did about 2 years at Savannah State. I think he got an associate's degree, is what I was told. But my father went on and finished 4 years, and he talked about how rough it was because he didn't have the math foundation. But he said just something clicked on him one day with a nice young teacher that was patient with him, and said something clicked, and he got it, and he graduated cum laude from Savannah State. And everybody know the stemming plant. He came to work for the stemming plant through the summer. And now Miss Nunny Taylor, she always tells me this. I don't think you know her, but Miss Taylor, every time I see her, she always tells the story that she had something to do with me being here, because she introduced my father and my mother. My mother was working at the stemming plant. She introduced them. So, and there you go. That's why now we're here. Charles moved and Mabel stayed around here, and she married Pierce Moore. And again, like I said, Charles was living in Savannah, and Ruby had married Willie C. Jr. We call him Uncle Dub Boughton in Brunswick. They lived in Brunswick. And then Aunt Lillian, I think she lived some here in Douglas and Savannah. She moved to Savannah with grandmama when she was there. And the twins, they always been right here in Coffee County. As I said, my father had, from their union, I was born Johnny Wilkerson, then Cynthia Wilkerson, Tawana Wilkerson, and Carl and Michael. And from the Mabels and Pierce Moore, there was Pearl, we call her Pearly May, and then there's Pierce Jr., and then there's Robert Frank, and Diana, Linda, and then Larry, and Marilyn, and then there's Clara. And from the Charles Wilkerson Sr., Mac Letha Williams, that he married, firstborn was Cecil, Charles Jr., then Carlitha, and then Steve, and Corey, and Stanley. Okay, Robert Stanley is what his original name is. And then Ruby Lee and W.C. Boughton. There was Willie C. Jr., we call him Skipper, Angela, and then Richard and Karen. Aunt Lillian married Jesse Williams, and of course they had one daughter, Jean Williams, and Jean also resided and was in Savannah. She's deceased right now. And then Uncle James married a Margaret Givens. And from that union, it was Jennifer, Tanya, Javetta, and Charles. And George, one of the twins, married Maxine Michael Haney. And from that union, there was Bridget, George Anthony, Carlos, and Michelle, and Elko Yolanda, and then Felicia, Adrian, and then Joey, and Veta. And a little story about them is they was very good athletes, you know. So they back in the days when they were younger, black and white couldn't play together. They couldn't even play together, you know, just a baseball game. But they tell the story, and Walter Huckabee tell the same story, because Walter Huckabee and these guys used to get together, sneak and get together and play baseball together. So it's kind of, you know, that's something, but they was real good athletes. And again, you know, I don't want to take up too much time, but if there's no questions, I'm done, but that's how we got to Douglas. Yes. Oh, that's my father. He served in World War II, and that's his platoon. After boot camp, that was his. Let's see, where's that picture? Here he is. We did a tight shot because I know you couldn't see that, but that's him there in that picture there. That's my father, Johnny Wilkerson. Okay, is that it? Okay.
I got a Michael story.
Okay.
Clayton Matthews is principal at the high school. Michael sounded just like him. When classes was changed, I'd see him and hear him coming down B-Wing. All right, kids, let's move out. It's time to go to class. And it was Michael. It wasn't Clayton Matthews. Sounded just like him.
Yeah.
So he was everybody knew Michael.
Yeah.
He made a point of that. He made a point of that. Thank you all for coming. Please mosey around, socialize. You're welcome. Thank you.